Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Workplace Wellness Festival's three-part webinar series. We are very proud to be kicking off with part one today, where we'll be exploring the topic of mental fitness during the pandemic. I am Tanya Arlington, the event director at Workplace Wellness Festival. We hope you've been staying well during these times, and we hope that you will get some very useful insights out of the topic we'll be exploring today. We're extremely proud to be welcoming the CEO of Converge International, Dr. Jenny George, the Director of Research, Innovation, Communications and Marketing, Paul Gretton-Watson, and the Director of People Assist, Kate Page. Converge International is one of the largest employee assistance program consultants and training providers in Australia. Hello, Jenny.
Hello.
Hello, Paul. Kate, thanks for joining. And yeah, we're really excited to hear about this. I know that you've been working really hard on the front lines to support a large number of people during these very challenging times. So really looking forward to hearing all about it today. Without any further delay, I'll hand over to you. If everyone could just remember that at the end of this discussion, we'll be moving to the sessions area. You'll see the icon on the left-hand side of your screen for a Q&A session where you'll get to ask questions either in the chat section or you can join with your video. Jenny, Paul and Kate, thank you so much for giving up your precious time today to join us and to share your insights. I encourage everybody to sit back, get comfortable, and we hope you enjoy the webinar. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Really appreciate that. I wanted to start actually with a poll because it's always good to hear from you. And what I thought I'd be asking you is, over the past 4 months, do you think mental health professionals, counsellors, psychologists and so on, have seen appointments rise substantially, rise a bit, stay about the same, drop a bit, or drop substantially? Now, to answer these polls, you can go over to the right-hand side. You've been using chat a little bit, and polls is another of those tabs on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have a look in the polls there, you'll be able to answer that. You won't see the answers unless you participate. So do participate, and then you will be able to see what everyone else says as well. So in that very first poll at the top there, over the last 4 months, have mental health professionals seen appointments basically go up a lot, go down a lot, or somewhere in between? And just a little bit of technical help as well. At the moment, you're probably seeing 4 windows with each of us equally there, and some slides that I've got there as well. If you want to make the slides bigger, you'll still see us, but we'll be slightly smaller in your screen. Then just double click on the slides. So if you double click on the slides, it will turn that into a slightly bigger area of your screen, and then you'll be able to see them a little bit more clearly. So just fill out that poll there and have a look at what everyone else has said as well. So it's pretty interesting, and I think that as we're looking at that, we can see that most people have the impression, and it's an impression that the media is giving us, that mental health professionals are seeing substantial or at least some rise in appointments. Kate, as a mental health professional, is that what mental health professionals, at least in Australia, are seeing?
Yes and no. It's been a bit of a roller coaster ride, actually. So what we saw at the very beginning of the pandemic in the first lockdown was that sessions actually reduced quite substantially. And we believe that was because people went into survival mode and actually were more concerned about whether they had a job, could put food on the table, pay their rent, mortgage, etc. So actually reaching out to mental health services substantially decreased and then plateaued for a while. We are now seeing, though, a steady and incremental, and in some places a rapid increase of demand. But there was definitely a 3 to 6 week period where sessions were reduced, which contradicted some of the messaging.
Absolutely. So one of the interesting things then is to have a look at the data that we've got. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, Converge has about 130,000 hours of counselling a year that we do through employee assistance programs. So we've got a fair bit of data, and we thought we'd start by sharing that with you. Between March and May, again, this is Australia, and I understand some of you, I saw in the chat box, which is fantastic, are joining us from other countries, which is wonderful. I think a lot of what we're saying is completely relevant, but the data we've got is for Australia, so we're going to start with that. You can see that round about half of all of the people calling into our services were mentioning coronavirus as something that was relevant to them. And that built really quickly during March, and it's maintained quite substantially, steadily through May. That then changed in June. So as lockdowns started coming off and people in Australia thought that they were getting a bit back to normal, we saw that those numbers changed. And really by the end of June, only about a third of our callers were mentioning coronavirus when they called up. That hasn't changed. That has not stayed the same, though. We have seen a fairly rapid increase just in the last 2 weeks, as Melbourne in particular has seen some changes in cases. And Victorian callers have rapidly gone back up from, again, about a third of callers were mentioning it 2 weeks ago to now it's back up well above 50% for Victorian callers, and that's pulled the national average up a little bit as well. It's basically Victoria, though. The rest of the country is still down at that kind of third of callers level. So I just thought we'd start with a little bit of that data. Of course, the next question is, what are the root causes? When 50% of people calling us are talking about coronavirus, what is it that they're talking about? So let's have a quick look at these issues here. And I just wanted to kind of start, and by the way, I am a data person. My PhD, the doctor at the beginning of my title is, I'm not a psychologist, I'm actually a data analytics person. I've got two people who are mental health professionals with me though, and they're going to give you a lot of this. But from a data perspective, when I look at this, it's really clear that the issues are probably as much about change, about the workplace, about economic uncertainty, as they are actually about health. But Kate, can you talk to us a little bit about what we're seeing here?
Yeah, sure. So it's changed once again throughout this period since March in the very initial stages, and we're still seeing this to a certain extent, particularly in parts of Victoria and New South Wales now, is quite a substantial presentation of what we call anticipatory anxiety. It means you're in a kind of a holding pattern. You know something's going to happen, but you have no idea what it's going to look like and when it's going to hit. And when people suffer anticipatory anxiety, it's actually quite ironic because when the event does hit, they actually tend to cope quite well with it. So for them, the major challenge is the anticipation of the event. And that was certainly the highest presenting feature at the beginning. Now what I'm a little bit concerned about is it's what I call the third stage of change. The first is anticipatory anxiety. The second is when change occurs and you have an emotional response to it, which is very normal. But the third stage is when change is protracted, which is what we're starting to see. And that is when we're most at risk of mental health being chipped away at. And we may see some presentations of anxiety and depression, which is what the data is starting to show us, and certainly what is being reflected in the increased need for mental health services.
And Paul, you've done a lot of work, particularly around the workplace and what's going on for people with job change and anxiety. What are you seeing in this data?
Yeah, the thing that I'm finding increasingly with the data is that people, it didn't get real for people, a lot of people early on in that sort of first kind of phase of the pandemic. But I think that particularly with this sort of new spike in Victoria and sort of the anxiety in New South Wales as well, that we're starting to see it have a greater sense of, oh my goodness, this is going to be a much longer term kind of proposition. And I think that's really causing people to really reflect on how on earth are they going to have to recalibrate their thinking, their lives, their careers and their workplaces to make this work for what is now likely to be a longer term proposition, at least in our two most populous states.
Mm. And one of the things that obviously we're wanting to talk about today is mental fitness. And mental fitness has a lot to do with well-being. So I thought actually now's another good time for us to have a little poll. This is about how do we have good well-being in bad times? And there's a lot of theory that says there are three main drivers of well-being. One is just your personality or your genetics, actually. One is what we've called mental fitness, and I'm going to explain that in a little moment, but just for now, mental fitness are all of the habits that we might have in our lives that help us to stay on top of things from a mental health perspective. And the third is circumstances or life events. So the good things that happen to us, the bad things that happen to us. We get married, we have kids, we move house. How do all of those circumstances impact on our well-being? And of course, coronavirus at the moment is clearly in that category of life events, the things that happen to us. So quick poll here. Again, go to the polls on the right-hand side and choose something. You need to choose something to be able to see the results. And the poll is, what percentage of long-term well-being do you think is driven by the bad or the good things that happen to people? So you can see, is it 75 to 100%? Is it 50 to 75%, 30 to 50%, 10 to 30%, or 0 to 10%? What kind of, range do you think we're in of the good and bad things that happen to us and their effect on our well-being? So have a go, put something in there and see where to. So we've got about, you can see it changing. It's wonderful once you put this poll in. So we've got the predominant kind of answers are probably 50 to 75%, with a good 30 to 50% kind of category in there. It's actually fairly centered, what you're saying, around sort of 50%. So about half of our well-being, you are saying, is driven by our circumstances. Surprisingly, that's actually not at all true. The answer is more like 10% actually. So our overall well-being is almost not affected at all. In fact, there's this whole thing called well-being set point theory, because people were baffled when researchers looked at this. They were baffled to see that no matter how bad or how good a thing that happened, you could win the lottery, you could have a horrible thing happen to you. A surprising amount of that went away after a fairly short amount of time, and people really bounced back. So the interesting thing about our well-being is that circumstances or life events actually don't have a very long-term effect. They're quite temporary. What we do see is that personality and genetics is really important. There's probably, as much as sort of 50 to 70% that's due to personality or genetics. We can't really control it. And the remainder, which is probably about 40% or so, is mental fitness. And that's what we're here to talk about today. And the important thing I think to note about mental fitness is that it's the only thing we can control. We can't control circumstances, well, at least not much. We can't control our personality or genetics. Even setting out on a very long-term goal of changing your personality is, very marginally effective, even if you try really hard. What you can do is you can control all of the things that you do in your life that lead to mental fitness, and that's that remaining part of well-being that you have control over. So here's the model of mental fitness. And you can see that this is a model that at Converge we've put together from a lot of research. So we've spent a huge amount of time looking at the peer-reviewed literature on this and putting a mental fitness model together. And what we can see is that there are four main areas: body, mind, spirit, and community. And those areas have all sorts of small daily practices that can go into making sure that you are as robust, as able to face whatever circumstances come along, and able to have good well-being through them. Kate and Paul, anything that you want to add here before we move on and think about what are some ways that we can recommend people to maintain their mental fitness?
So I think one of the key things, Jenny, is the notion, a little bit like physical fitness, that you kind of have to chip away at it as part of a daily routine, daily practice, daily series of hopefully good habits that you form over time. There's no kind of magic wand on this, just as there isn't for physical fitness.
Absolutely. And the thing that I love about mental fitness as a concept is, firstly, it's incredibly positive. This is about things that you have control of and you can do, but also it's not mental health in the sense of, going to the doctor. You could break your leg and still be really physically fit. So mental fitness isn't saying that you might never have a mental illness, but it is saying you're getting yourself in trim and you're doing your very best to make sure you'll recover as quickly as possible, and that you've actually reduced the likelihood that you'll be injured in a mental health perspective, just as you would by going to the gym in a physical health perspective.
And I think from my perspective, what is really encouraging about this is where even when you're going through quite a significant crisis in your life, where your ability to be rational in emotions is quite compromised and it's incredibly difficult to control those emotions, what you can still control is the behavioral component of your life, and actually head more towards functional behaviors as opposed to dysfunctional, which then positively reinforce how you think and also how you emotionally respond, which fits with that very habitual pattern of what mental fitness is all about.
Fantastic. Well, let's actually dive into a little bit about how can we improve mental fitness, because obviously none of us are living in a time that's particularly easy, and mental fitness, because it's habits, it's actually really interesting that probably at the moment these are more disrupted than they've ever been for most of us, because all sorts of normal things that we do in our lives have suddenly been upended. So in this environment, how do we maintain and improve our mental fitness? So let's go through each of these 4 areas in detail and start with body. And remember, body has got 4 components: exercise, nutrition, sleep, and drugs and alcohol. And to be honest, we've got sort of at most an hour, including questions today. You could probably do an hour on exercise or an hour on nutrition and how they relate to mental fitness. So we're going to be at 1,000 miles above ground level and looking down in a very, very broad sweep. But tell me a little bit about this. And Kate, I wanted to start with you because you've got a lot of experience, particularly in some areas with helping with drug and alcohol counselling and so on in the past. What are some things people should be thinking about at the moment?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jenny. I think the main thing is for people to actually, not necessarily to stop drinking in any way whatsoever, but to have their eyes open to the impact that it potentially has on your mental health. So you can actually take somebody who has strong mental wellness and they start consuming alcohol incrementally over a long period of time, slowly increase that daily intake, and actually they will end up with compromised mental health no matter where they started from. And that is simply because of the chemical nature, not just of alcohol, but a lot of drugs as well. So it's about having your eyes open to the impact. Unfortunately, with alcohol, the first 1 or 2 drinks can actually work. If you suffer from anxiety or depression, it can actually make you feel more relaxed. Similarly, if you're feeling depressed, it can actually make or increase your mood. What is really, really important, though, is to recognize that it is any drink subsequent to those first 2 or 3 that will have a negative impact. It will actually increase your propensity to anxiety or increase your propensity to flatness. And it's interesting, I've had a lot of clients who actually make contact day 2 or the first day, but also day 2 or 3 after what we call a big bender session. And they're feeling incredibly flat, incredibly demotivated and incredibly disengaged. And they are questioning whether or not they're returning to some of their mental illness. It's actually largely a result of their alcohol consumption. And 1 or 2 days later, with a reintroduction of some of their good habits, their mental health improves as well. So once again, just have your eyes open to the impact and be aware that whilst it's not heavily promoted in the media, it's scientifically proven to have an impact on mental health.
Mm. And Paul, what do we know about sleep? Because one of the things that I've been fascinated by is that asking a question about sleep is almost the first thing a counsellor does in a session, and it's one of the first things that they work on. What's going on with that?
Yeah, look, it truly is one of the things that I focus on most quickly when somebody's really in deep struggle. Why? Because it's usually one of the first things that falls off the perch, if you want to think of it that way, when things are going awry. But the great thing about sleep is that as quickly as it can fall off the perch, it can also be, you can regain or relearn or kind of rebuild positive sleeping habits quite quickly. So that's often, I find, a very practical way and place to start with somebody who is, as I say, struggling. because they will get, it's bidirectional. They will start to feel so much better when they sleep a lot better, and then that starts to create a positive feedback loop, and very quickly their mental health kind of follows their improved sleep trajectory. So it is well worth putting some energy into it when things are really kind of going pear-shaped.
And it's one of those things, isn't it, that's either a beautiful upward spiral or a death spiral downwards.
Absolutely.
You know, if sleep's going well, it helps mental health, which helps sleep, which helps mental health, and you have this beautiful feedback loop. And unfortunately, it also goes the other way, in the opposite direction.
And it can be complex, which is why it's actually helpful to reach out for support if you are having difficulty sleeping, because it's a subconscious activity. And if you apply a level of consciousness to try and resolve a subconscious activity, it can actually have the opposite effect. So it's about learning to actually not give it too much importance in order to be able to relax into sleep, which is why I personally find getting some objective advice around sleep is actually really constructive.
I think the final thing I'd say is that the actual reasons and the issues with people's sleep may vary a great deal. So it's important to get that more informed kind of perspective on what aspects is it that is actually contributing to your poor sleep, and going to intervene there. So what your intervention may be could vary quite a lot between several people all experiencing sleep problems.
Fantastic. And we have to move on quite quickly, but just before we do, there was just one thing I wanted to mention about exercise and nutrition, and that is mental health. From an exercise and nutrition point of view, doesn't actually require all the same things that physical health does. So, for example, you don't have to get your heart rate to a particular level. You don't have to do a particular amount of exercise for mental health benefits. You actually just need to move. And even from a nutrition point of view, it's not about losing weight, actually. In fact, weight is almost completely irrelevant here. It's actually about the quality and the type of food you eat, which, by the way, headline answer, Mediterranean diet, has been shown to be really great for mental health. It's actually about the kind of food you eat, and you don't need to think that this is about going on a diet. It's certainly not about that. So just before we move on, I thought it was worth mentioning that, because I think people do get a bit confused when they hear about diet and exercise and think that it means the same thing as, some kind of boot camp and losing weight, and it's not about that at all. It's just about good quality food and getting a bit of exercise and movement into your day. So the second thing then is mind, and there's a lot we could talk about here. There's three main areas of mind that we've seen from the research are really relevant, and the first is a positive mindset, the second is a growth mindset, and the third is mindfulness. And you'll have heard about mindfulness probably a lot. Perhaps less about the positive and growth mindsets. So I thought I would actually start by just describing growth mindset, because when I first came across this, I didn't quite know what it meant. So it's really interesting that when you read the research, a growth mindset is as much about your attitude to failure as it is to anything else. If you've got a growth mindset, the kind of thing that you'll say when you fail is, oh gosh, I must need to spend more time on learning how to do that. If you don't have a growth mindset, the kind of thing you might say when you fail is, that must be something that I'm not very good at. In other words, you're kind of viewing yourself as a set of abilities that is fixed and that doesn't have the capacity for change. So a growth mindset is basically saying, I could change, I could learn, I could figure out how to do that. That's what a growth mindset is. And one of the tips that I've found really helpful for that is actually just continuing to challenge yourself with new things. I think sometimes if we really stay within a comfort zone of things that we know really well and that we've done, we never put ourselves in a position to fail, and therefore to be able to have this kind of attitude that says, well, I should learn and I should develop that capability. So one possibility as we're in this sort of lockdown or coronavirus world is it could be tempting to stay within a comfort zone, but we know that it's really good for our mental health if we continue to just try some gentle new things. So that's one tip from me. How about from you guys?
Yeah, for me, it's actually probably one of the biggest warning signs is staying with self-pity, which kind of carries on from what you just said, Jenny. It's very, very tempting to feel sorry for ourselves. And by the way, it's actually really normal to in these early stages, particularly for Victorians going through second lockdown at the moment. But if you stay with self-pity, that's where you actually stop evolving. You stay stuck and your mental health will start to be compromised, which is that whole concept of growth mindset. So it's actually moving forward through the stage, acknowledging the emotion, but problem solving your way out of it. And for me, self-learning is critical in that space, which is once again what Jenny was referring to. Having something that I actually put my mind to and to stay curious and to want to learn about it is key to me actually not staying with self-pity and evolving through to a strategy stage.
And Paul, positive mindset, gratitude. What could you give as some advice around that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that is perhaps a little maybe intuitive for some, but I found a little counterintuitive, is the degree to which the actual act of being kind, demonstrating gratitude, and being grateful for the things that come to you in life is so powerful in shaping your mental well-being. And in the last sort of several weeks, particularly in lockdown for myself, I have been practicing daily kind of rituals and sort of practicing what I preach really around gratitude, and have found that it really does connect you with all the positive that's going on in amongst what could feel like a very black cloud and kind of pessimistic and doom and gloom kind of reality that we might be all wondering and worrying about. But there's a heck of a lot to be grateful for. And some of the things we've found is that this whole kind of positivity pandemic that people are focused on right now, about all the good things that are coming with this time of lockdown and disruption. There's a heck of a lot of great stuff. And I think reconnecting with family, what's important to us, reevaluating our careers, thinking about how we want to live a better life beyond this, all of those things I think are enormously enriching.
And one of the things I think that I was stunned by in the research is you can actually get benefits of positivity without kind of truly buying into it or even believing it. There was a beautiful piece of research that showed that people who wrote down things in a journal that they were grateful for got benefits, even if at the beginning they said, I think this is all, hokum, and I truly don't believe it. The act of doing it was actually enough, which I think is a great thing to, even if you're feeling somewhat skeptical about it, this is worth giving a try because it has been shown to work.
And that's sorry, Paul.
No, I was going to say, we even know that from cognitive behavioural therapy, that the act or the behaviour of smiling, the act or behaviour of being kind of gracious and at a front of house role actually shifts your whole behaviour and mood to feeling actually better and more grateful and more positive. So there are strong parallels with the best of cognitive behavioural therapy and the principles that underpin that with what we're talking about here.
And look, we'll move through mindfulness in part because there are so many tools that are available to practice that. So, not wanting to minimize that at all. It's a fantastic tool. But I think it's interesting, for us to spend a bit of time on things you might not have thought about. And the third big area is spirit. And we've put two areas underneath this. And one is nature, connecting with nature, and the other is meaning and purpose. One of the things I think that's important, particularly for people where they may have jobs disrupted, is understanding how their meaning and purpose continues through a period of instability with employment. So taking lots of opportunities, if you're a team leader, to talk about the why of the jobs you're doing or your team is doing, and finding that purpose is actually an incredibly important thing at this time. Kate, tell us a little bit about nature, because I understand that some psychologists are now prescribing nature. What are they doing?
Right. Yes, it's been written in the form of a prescription. Yeah, it's called ecotherapy, and it's actually a really, really popular new movement. It's been shown to be hugely beneficial, just in terms of even the color green. Actually, looking at green has been shown to have positive impact on one's mental well-being. So yes, trying to get out into nature as much as possible. But also I want to actually acknowledge people's real circumstances. I have happen to live in an incredibly built up part of the city. There isn't a lot of nature around me, but actually I purposefully take note of the bits of nature that are around me, and that is still of benefit.
And you have a plant behind me. I've got a plant on my desk here. It's an important part of our life, isn't it?
Correct. Exactly. And the other thing I'd say in terms of the value stuff is, particularly for managers and leaders, be aware, as well as for employees, be aware of transitioning back into your normal work. If you have been deployed somewhere, or you have actually personally been experiencing this event, it can sometimes feel quite jarring to go back to your normal job and reacquaint yourself with the meaning behind it. Please normalize that, stay with it, but continue to problem solve your way through it. Because as Jenny says, finding a sense of purpose and value, even just one small component in your work, is critical to actually feeling that level of mental well-being.
And Paul, different people might find different purposes in the same job. How would a manager deal with that?
I think what's really important is to take the time to, number one, probably do much more regular checking in with your team than you might ordinarily. And I think some of the teams that I've seen most successfully get through this have actually daily check-ins, not just, and that might only be for a bit of light and bright and breezy sort of first thing in the morning, but also much more intentional kind of checking with how people are traveling. And then being attuned to that in thinking, well, what is it that this person's really struggling with? What might help them maybe as a project, or as a maybe they're really desperately craving kind of doing some joint work, and they're very extroverted and they're stuck at home being, in this very introverted kind of reality, and they're finding there's just no way that they can get energized with this deep kind of introverted world they're living. So there are some clever and more attuned managers picking up on that and finding ways to enable them to do that, or maybe asking them to do the presentation rather than to be the passive participant. They would probably get really energized by that. So being attuned to different team members' wants, needs, preferences over time, and really setting the work program as best you can to meet those changing needs.
Thanks so much. And the last one, which is exactly that, staying connected. There are two big things here, and one is social connections, the different relationships that we have in our community. It might be family, might be friends. And then the other one is giving. And there's a couple of things that I thought was really worth saying about this from the research. So the first is it's quite important. There's a big difference from a mental health perspective between people who have at least 4 good friends or family members who they feel like they can actually open up to. It's not so much about a big circle of acquaintances. That's not relevant. It's actually about how many really great relationships do you have where you feel like you can divulge quite a lot of personal information to them and really, find that to be a good and solid relationship. At least 4. That's the kind of the magic number from the research. The second thing I wanted to mention about giving was that there's a beautiful study that was done where people were asked to have kind of me time, and they said, do something that's good for you, for your mental health, that's looking after yourself. Go for a massage, this is pre-COVID, go for a massage, have time for yourself. Another group of people, the control group, did nothing. And the last group of people were told, do something good for someone else. What was really interesting was that the acts of kindness group, the group that was there to do something for someone else, had substantially higher well-being than either of the other 2 groups, much higher than the me time group, and they sustained it for longer as well. And I think that this idea of kindness, of giving, of volunteering, of giving money, of all of the things that we might do, which is sort of philanthropic or altruistic, we don't always think of in terms of our own well-being, but it's absolutely critical part of it. Where have you seen this, both Paul and Kate? Let's start with Paul, in the people that you've been interacting with.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, a lot of people have felt very sort of disempowered and kind of in the wings with the whole pandemic experience. But I think that we've seen globally that the generosity and the overt symbolic ways that people have acknowledged frontline workers in health in Spain and in Italy and here in Australia to a degree as well. There's been a lot of very conscious and overt acknowledgement of the extraordinary work that our emergency services, Defence Force, and particularly our frontline health workers are doing. And people are very deeply appreciative. And I think it's helped recalibrate what fundamentally and genuinely is important to a society kind of functioning well when the chips are down. And people are deeply grateful and showing, I think, very, we know that with some of the charities that work with those groups have had substantial increases in funds to them, whereas some of the other charities that perhaps don't have that orientation have really felt it to be a very tight time with people having to restrict their giving generally. So it's interesting. I think it's really playing out quite powerfully right now.
And Kate, have you got any tips for people staying connected? What are just some really practical ideas about how to maintain those social networks?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jenny. And I guess once again, I want to acknowledge people's reality, because you're either in lockdown and therefore isolated from your family, or perhaps you haven't been able to get back to your family. I'm speaking personally. All my family are currently in Queensland, so it is just my dog and I down here at the moment in Melbourne. And for me, it's just been critical to find different ways of connection. And that is actually through virtual catch-ups. I actually on the weekend had probably 4 or 5 tea catch-ups over Zoom, but also for me, it's actually been finding little moments of connection, which has also proven to be quite effective. And that's actually in the dog park, talking to people who are part of my community and actually getting to know my neighbours and offering help in that space. And both of those activities have been incredibly helpful. And if I can maybe self-disclose somewhat embarrassingly, that initially through COVID, TikTok actually helped me, because there was a lovely connection at that stage of TikTok with the global phenomena and people dancing and singing their way through COVID, which was actually beautiful and something that I could do that didn't require someone to be in the room with me, and I feel quite connected.
Thanks, Kate. That's brilliant. So just moving on, that was a lot of sort of thoughts about ways that we might maintain our own mental fitness. When we move to an organisational context and think about what are some ways that leaders might be able to support staff through the pandemic, we've got just a few things that we wanted to mention. Some of these directly come out of the mental fitness information that we've just been talking about. Some of them are more a case study of things that we've seen working here at Converge for our own staff, or things that we've seen work for our customers and clients. So, Kate, do you want to talk us through checking in?
Yeah, check-ins become critical. And I guess a part of this is acknowledging that we're slightly in a two-speed COVID reality at the moment, with the majority of states actually reducing restrictions and getting out and interacting again. And Victoria and parts of New South Wales increasingly look as though people are having a very, very different experience. So my advice in terms of checking in is to individualize it. Really acknowledge people's different experience, because what we've also found is even for people in Victoria in lockdown, there are very, very different experiences within that group. People who may be facing redundancies or potentially are facing or exacerbation of mental health issues, or perhaps are more isolated than others, versus people who are in a secure job with family around them. So it's knowing the circumstances of the people and taking that into account in terms of acknowledging those circumstances when you do check in. And for those in states where the restrictions aren't great, to make sure there's a form of acknowledgement towards those towards those colleagues or workers or friends who are actually in lockdown, because the experience is profoundly different. And once we individualize those check-ins, that sense of feeling acknowledged helps people problem solve their way out of it. It is incredibly difficult for people, employees, anybody to problem solve their way out of a situation without feeling acknowledged for being in that in the first place. And that requires a check-in, and it requires it to be authentic by individualizing that experience of that person.
So that's a brilliant talk about individualized communication. Paul, what about corporate communication?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things, and I more or less touched on it earlier when I talked about the criticality of communicating with your own teams at that kind of very micro level daily, if not very frequently at a team level and at an individual level. I think at an organisational level, and certainly we've experienced this at Converge, is that we have ramped up our communication at a broad level within Converge, and certainly we have probably quadrupled or maybe even 5 or 10 times our communication externally with our customer base to make sure that they have the information that they require to be able to share within their organisation, tips, suggestions, guidance. People are kind of craving quality information at the moment and craving clarity and certainty, and doing that in an authentic, warm tone. And I think that that's one of the things that we have really taken on board as an organisational commitment. And I know, Jenny, even your fortnightly CEO updates, which we kind of like, these got to really fly, these got to really kind of resonate with the staff, have probably been one of our single most important and positive. And I suspect you're going to be lumped with it for a long time, Jenny. But,
Yeah.
you know, it's been something that the staff have found enormously helpful to get that kind of clarity of message and the consistency of message as it kind of changes over time, and we deal with the good and the bad of kind of what's been going on in our different states, but together as an organisation. And that's really what we've been trying to do for our customers as well, with the just explosion of information that we probably have been drowning people in for some time now. But we'll continue to do so because it's been so well received.
And it's really interesting that the thing I never imagined I would need to do as a CEO is actually learn enough about the science to be able to have some, decent decision making and communication around literally what's going on in the world. So, Paul and Kate, I about 2 weeks ago, just as we were heading into a ramp up of cases in Victoria, I did a whole, 1 hour communication for the whole company. And really it was as much about what is coronavirus, where are the cases going, what is a doubling time, what does the R0 number mean, but also, what can we do about it, and what does the science say about masks and about social distancing? Like, I just never thought that I would be reading medical articles to find out, whether masks are really needed. And I think that one of the things that's been interesting in this is I think that companies that sat back and waited for the government to give advice, actually, I think our Australian government has been very good and has given good advice, but it's been very reactive if, as a leadership team, you waited for that, because it's almost too late to communicate once the government's come out with it. You really needed to be ahead of that and to be thinking, at least at the leadership level and at the leadership team, about things and about the possibilities before government restrictions came on board, because otherwise you would be really turned around. And I think that the biggest thing for us was we just really decided that we would deal with these practicalities and we would think about them. So we've ended up with all of the states except Victoria now have counsellors who are seeing people face to face again. And we've got 5 pillars that we used for getting people back to face work. And one was around hygiene, which is sanitizers and cleaning and so on. The other was about social distancing, making sure that there was literally physical distance in our rooms, but also thinking about how we would divide up work teams to make sure there weren't too many overlaps with people working in overlapping teams. So we've thought of things as bubbles and tried to keep bubbles separate where we could. I actually have to say, from a communication standpoint, if you're ever thinking about how to communicate or how to think about things, the New Zealand government has the best communications and the best analogies and the best videos that I've ever seen. Go to their websites. It's fantastic. I'm a New Zealander, but not biased. The third thing is masks, and you can see the picture there of someone on public transport. We provided masks both for our own people and for our clients right from the get-go, and we always thought that that was an important part of it because we were looking at the science and seeing that there really was some benefit from this. And we've been, waiting actually for governments to at least make them compulsory on public transport. Still hasn't happened, but we do hope it will happen at some point because we just think it's a really, really good way to change the culture. Symptoms, we have a daily symptom check tracker. We just created our own tiny little app that consultants fill out at the beginning of the day that lets us know that they aren't exhibiting any symptoms. And we find that useful because a checklist of the slightly less common symptoms also means that people aren't just thinking that it's fever or nothing. And so some of those symptoms are really helpful. And then we've also got a paper trail. We also, have some clarity about people having filled that out every day. The last thing is culture. And this is one that we've thought a lot about. We wanted to have a culture in which people would keep each other accountable for being safe. This is always a big factor within physical safety environments as well. If you're working in manufacturing, it's important that you have a culture where things don't get swept under the rug, but people feel free to surface any safety issues that they see. We also thought that was important here too, and it's important that people feel free to call out things that they think are unsafe, and that we will listen to that, and that we'll do something about it. So that was the fifth of our 5 pillars for getting back to face-to-face work. And the last thing I wanted to say is that as part of this, we also role model mental fitness. I wanted to talk about what we at Converge do, because I think it's a model that could work for almost any organization. So firstly, as leaders, we try to be really intentional about our own mental fitness. And one of the things that we do as a leadership team at least once a week, and often on a sort of first thing in the morning daily basis, is just talk about how we're feeling and how we're going with some of these habits. So I mentioned on Monday, as a matter of fact, that I needed to be much more intentional about exercising outside every day and just getting that into a routine and habit. And I said that to my leadership team because I wanted to have a group that had heard me say that and would kind of ask me how that was going. So that's an important part of it. And talking to the team about those habits is a really great way you can do it. But we've also put it into our culture as an organization. You can see on the right-hand side of the slides here, this is our gratitude tree. We actually make an annual calendar around the 4 mental fitness areas: body, mind, spirit, and community. Right now, we're this quarter, we're talking about mind. And so gratitude, that positive mindset, is one of the important things. We've done that by asking people to mention something they're grateful for. And we will be putting these as little leaves onto a Converge tree. When we originally planned this before the pandemic, it was going to be sitting on the office wall, and the tree was all done. I saw it. It was beautiful. And people were going to literally pin up the things they were grateful for. Now we're doing it virtually, but it's still having a wonderful effect. Earlier in the pandemic, when we were focused on spirit, we had a photo competition where everyone was encouraged on their daily walk outside the house to take a photo on their phone of something in nature that they'd seen. And we got some stunning photos. I still can't believe the quality of photos we got. It was just wonderful and so uplifting. I found even wandering on my walks and looking for things to photograph made me see the world in a new way, and it was a really helpful exercise. And the last thing we've done is we've put some social networking opportunities in. On Facebook, we have a Facebook group called Corona Lounge, which is the place that people can hang out, and we've had virtual Friday drinks and done some other things like that to try and put social interactions back into people's lives when they can't be in the office. So just a few ideas about how you might translate those mental fitness 4 areas into some corporate exercises or corporate culture that you could put into the things that you do as a team. We are running a little bit over time, but this is the final thing here, and it's just a quick poll to finish. And as you're filling out this poll, which is again on the right-hand side of your screen, Tanya will just be coming back on. And if you've got questions for us, we'd be extremely happy to answer those. There's actually a separate questions section, and Tanya, I know, will tell you about how to get there, but it's in the sessions area. So Paul, Kate, and I will join you over there in just a few moments.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for sharing those incredible insights. I know personally I've got so much out of it today. A couple of my takeaways have been, I found the data really helpful to understand that we're all experiencing similar waves of ups and downs. And, you know, understanding that self-care is really important before we can help others. You know, you provided us with some fantastic tools that we can take with us to really help ourselves in our home life, our family, with our friends, and also with our colleagues and teams that we might be leading. So really, really grateful. I'm also a big fan of your Flourish magazine. Converge International put out an e-magazine called Flourish once a month that has wonderful updates and reminders to help support us through this time. So if everyone will just type in their email address into the chat section, we can get the team from Converge to send those out for you. We're also really excited to be able to hear more from the team at Converge at our main event on the 18th and 19th of August, Workplace Wellness Festival. If you've typed in your email address, we can also send you the registration link for that. So we'll now move on to the sessions area. You'll see the sessions icon on the left-hand side. If you all just click on there, you'll see Jenny, Paul and Kate ready to answer your questions. Don't be shy, jump in with your video if you like, or otherwise just type in your questions in the chat section. Thank you very much.